Hello, listeners. It's Dr. Thomas here. We were preparing to record an episode with Jacob Blake and his brother Pauly Jackson today, and then life happened. Do you remember Jacob Blake? On August 23rd, 2020, Jacob, who was 29 years old at the time, was shot 7 times in the back, in front of his kids, by a white officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. The shooting was caught on video, went viral, and the outrage that followed rekindled the nationwide protest for racial justice following the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor that same summer. We were planning on speaking with Jacob and his brother about their experiences about being fathers, about raising children in America today. But Jacob had to postpone his interview. He's still managing severe chronic pain, disability, and dysfunction. We will reconnect with Jacob when his mind and body allow. But today I was able to briefly speak with Pauly about his brother. Here is that audio now. Pauly, why don't you tell us exactly what's going on?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you guys for having me. And, Jacob just has been dealing with the past 3 years a lot of strenuous pain throughout his legs and throughout his back and just throughout his body as a result of this shooting 3 years ago. It's been incredibly trying on a day to day issue to get sleep, for him to operate as a father, for him to even take care of himself at times. So we were hoping to have him on today, but hopefully we'll hear from him soon.
I know a lot of people see Jacob as an unwitting cultural icon at this point, part of the civil rights movement, if you might describe him that way. But I know that Jacob probably would use father as the first word to describe himself. And now this is a father who wants to engage his children, wants to do all these things, and is physically unable to do them and is sometimes mentally unable to do them. And you're stepping in as a surrogate father to his children while also dealing with your own children and your own family. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that incident with the police officer in Kenosha changed your life and changed Jacob's life?
Yeah, of course. First and foremost, a lot of people don't know that, it was actually, my nephew, his son's Israel's birthday, the day of the incident and where the incident occurred. It was his birthday party, enjoying and obviously a public showing that he is a father first, right? Like he was throwing a birthday party for his child. Um, that actually ended up witnessing the shooting. The boys ended up witnessing it. Um, but Jacob, has had to transition into, not physically being able to do everything for his boys that he was doing before. He was the primary, on point person for his kids. And now, interesting enough, I actually take a lot of advice from my brother as a father. He was a father before me, has a couple more kids than me. And so even to this date that he's not able to be physically present for his kids, I look to him mentally, emotionally for advice on dealing with our children. He's a very big man of Christ, and follows his faith very closely. So taking his advice, being able to just turn to him in a time of need is very important to me. But physically, there's times where he needs and is very, you know, apprehensive about even asking, right? Like as a father, asking is something that, we tend to shy away from because we're so used to getting it done ourselves or the ones being asked to do. So him asking for me to, get his kids from Wisconsin or, be able to take them here, or him not asking me, just, taking responsibility to do it, as well as our other family members, our sisters, our moms, um, being able to step up. So it's super important for us to stick together as family in this time of need, and something that will affect us for our lifetime and has been affecting us for the time being.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Pauly. We will be following this story and continuing, and we'll be releasing the full episode with both of the brothers as part of the conversation. We've talked about how sometimes legacy is fostered upon us or forced upon us, and in other states we step into legacy. But the cost that legacy often comes with is something that we don't always pay attention to. So we will be talking about the cost of legacy and fatherhood with Jacob and Pauly in a future episode. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. See you next time.
The legacy of activism is sometimes intentional and at other times unintentional. Some activists engage through deliberate choice, and others, with no grand design, have it forced upon them. But the cost of activism and legacy can be very heavy. Some pay with their bodies. Others pay the ultimate price. Pauly and Jacob have unwittingly become contemporary activists. Today's show is about another family who are now part of the history of Black activism in America. I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas. My work and this show is dedicated to educating, validating, elevating, and celebrating the importance of Black fatherhood. This is the Black Fatherhood Podcast. So far, all of the stories we've highlighted on this podcast have touched on identity, family, and legacy. Today's show picks up the thread of legacy and weaves it through generations of American history, Black revolutionaries, community leaders, poets, and rappers. Today we're examining legacy and the legacy of family and fatherhood through the eyes of one family, one big, historically important, talented, and controversial family, the Shakurs. Our guest is acclaimed writer and journalist Santi Elijah Holley, and his new book is An Amerikan Family, The Shakurs and the Nation They Created. His book offers a detailed account of the fight for Black liberation in the United States as experienced and shaped by the Shakur family. And of course, it is the story of their renowned, gifted, and turbulent son, Tupac. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We'll dive into the details in a minute, but why exactly did you choose to write about the Shakur family? I mean, there are so many Black families whose stories intersect with American history. Why choose the Shakurs? What made them so unique?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. For me, the Shakur family is sort of the first family of Black liberation. They've been highly respected for so many years in the movement, by movement elders, by people who are committed to the struggle for Black liberation. Since the mid to late 60s through the 70s and even until today, the Shakur name, the Shakur family carries so much resonance and respect with people who are committed to this work. And so for me, I was a Tupac fan growing up as a teenager in the 90s, and later in life, I really sort of learned more about where he came from, his family, who raised him, the people who helped, bring him up and make him into the person he was, who was very prescient, very knowledgeable about this history. So I wanted to, just for my own personal interest, learn about the family, because I'm coming from a background of activism and protest, and also just being a music fan and fan of American history and learning about it. I wanted to learn about this story for myself. And then the more I learned about it, the more I realized just how significant and inspirational this family was, not just to music fans, but to activists, to revolutionaries. And I felt like I really wanted to share this story widely, because many people don't know this story. They didn't hear about this history in school. And so I just felt like this history is important, this family is important, the work they did, resonates to today. So I just felt like it was my obligation and the things that I was learning to sort of share these stories and to try to speak to as many people as I could, and to share their stories too, before, while we still have them. So that's really, it started off personal project, personal interest, and just the more I got into it, the more I realized just how important and vital it is to American history, world history, anybody that's sort of in the struggle for liberation.
It's amazing that such a deep legacy has been laid down for us, and a large swath of America has never been exposed to this legacy. It's never been exposed to this history. And you've written that the legacy of the Shakur family exists all around us in culture, activism, and our professional lives, and that the Shakurs were catalysts of Black creativity, recovery, and above all, resistance. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, with different people in the Shakur family, and the family is pretty broad. To take the Shakur name, you are joining this tribe, this sort of clan of people who are all committed to the struggle, to the movement. So the people who were involved in the struggle, people who consider themselves family, who joined the family, became part of the Shakurs. Uh, they took an approach to liberation and freedom and self-determination that was very much grassroots organized, very just on the ground, community-based organization, rather than sort of big national movements. They were committed to local, independent, grassroots, community-based healthcare, tenants organizing, legal aid to people who can afford legal aid, legal services, things like that they just recognized an urgent need in the community, and did what they had to do to address those urgent needs. And while also opening themselves up to vulnerability, to sort of change and learning and adapting to new challenges, whether internal challenge or external challenges from the repressive forces from the government. They were always adapting, always changing, just depending on the need. And that sort of carries on to today, I think, with people who recognize needs in their community and go out and just do what has to be done to address those needs. Whether it's healthcare, which Dr. Matulu Shakur was a pioneer in. Afeni Shakur was a pioneer in just teaching herself law and advocating for herself. And then Tupac just being sort of a vulnerable artist who has conflicting or seemingly conflicting messages of social justice, racial justice, but also just being a young Black man in America and all the issues that comes about, especially in the 90s, and the things that he learned from his family to watch out for with police harassment. And, so all these things that we sort of take for granted as far as the right to protest and the right to sort of march and advocate for yourselves, these things really did start, or at least were really heightened with the work that the Shakur family was doing in the 60s and 70s.
As you were talking, I was just thinking about what that difference in activism looks like today versus what it looked like with the Shakur family. And we'll come to it in a little bit, but the two words that keep popping in my mind are creation versus reaction. And it seems like the Shakurs were more about creation rather than reacting. And a lot of what we're seeing today, for example, with George Floyd, was reaction to George Floyd, reaction to Breonna Taylor, reaction to these different things. And what I'm hearing is the Shakur family, though not all related by blood, were at the heart of the Black liberation movement. That their story grew out of the ideology and practices of men who came before them, like men like Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. You title a chapter in your book, Patriarchs. Tell us how the Shakur family came to be through the lens of fatherhood and father figures. I know Saladin Shakur was the patriarch of the family and the ideological leader for many. Can you set the stage maybe for us by kind of helping us see what those early days were like with a reading from your book?
Yeah, I'll set it up, this reading up a little bit. Saladin Shakur, you mentioned, he was an older gentleman. He was a father, husband, and he was also he converted recently in the mid 60s to Sunni Islam because he worked with Malcolm X shortly before Malcolm X was assassinated. His organization, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, the OAAU, Saladin was a part of that, worked with him. He's also a former Garveyite in Garvey's organization. And Saladin was a mentor to younger folks, especially his sons, but also people within the Jamaica Queens area of New York City. A mentor taught them about Pan-Africanism, Islam, Black nationalism. He taught younger generations who were influenced by Malcolm X, who idolized, lionized really Malcolm X. After Malcolm X was assassinated, people were looking to other sort of elder figures, or people who knew this history, who could sort of teach these philosophies and ideologies to younger generations. So that's where Saladin comes in. And Saladin was the first one to take the name Shakur, which was an Arabic word roughly translated from thankful. But he took that name when he sort of shed his birth name or his slave name, took the name Saladin Shakur, and that was sort of the beginning, because his sons took the name Shakur for themselves, and other people took the name Shakur for themselves as sort of a tribute to Saladin. Really, it became like a tribute to Saladin's work, and then it became a tribute just to the movement itself. So, but this Saladin was the one who really got that started. So I'm going to read just a little bit just to introduce Saladin from the book. This is sort of introduction to Saladin Shakur. A dark-skinned, striking, intelligent, and dapper man, Saladin was more than a tutor to these young, enthusiastic pupils. He was a father figure. They called him Abba. As many of these teenagers came from Garveyite households, Saladin's role as surrogate father was accepted and consented to by their parents. Bilal Santi Ali recalled, Saladin adopted us as his children, even though many of us had biological parents who were present in our lives. But our biological parents understood that we had somebody who we called Abba because of the special relationship that they had with the struggle. As advisor, elder, and spiritual mentor, Saladin provided a bridge between Garvey and Malcolm X, between the UNIA movement of the older generation and the nascent interest in Islam among younger blacks. Sonia Ali recalled how, quote, a lot of young people that were in the liberation struggle, many who later joined the Black Panther Party as it developed, related to Saladin Shakur as somebody that we could talk to about Islam, learn about Islam from. And Sekou Odinga remembered Saladin as, quote, he was very instrumental in the development of things here in New York and the people here in New York. He was an inspiration in so many ways, end quote.
Thank you so much for that. And I almost feel like I've seen Saladin. I see him in so many men who I've seen take up fatherhood roles, men who take up mentoring roles. I see him in the father who chooses to coach Little League. I see him in the father and the man who chooses to run the scout troop, and the man who looks out for the kids on the corner stoop. I see him in so many men. I see him in myself. In connection to my nieces and nephews, and to kids who I work with at the church who call me uncle. I see him in so many men who may not be biological fathers, but who are fathers in other ways, and who are doing this work of subsidizing parenting. And of course, this work that Saladin was doing, and this work that the Shakurs were building and partaking of and extending, all of this was taking place in the mid-1960s, a time of increasingly dangerous race riots, a time of tumultuousness, so tumultuous that Malcolm X predicted that 1964 would be America's hottest year, her hottest year yet, a year of much racial violence and much racial bloodshed. Tell us about what was happening in the country at that time and how it was shaping Black identity.
Yeah, well, I mean, to quickly to touch on an earlier point, Saladin was really a father figure to people who did not have fathers in their lives at the time. I mean, this was, like you said, I mean, he was not just a mentor, but he was a father figure. A lot of these folks did not have fathers in their lives, and so they came to Saladin, and he really was that person for them. And in that time, especially in the mid-'60s, this was a time of sort of you saw this shift from the nonviolent sort of integrationist movements from Martin Luther King Jr. into what became the Black Power movement. Sort of there's a slow shift where people, especially younger people, were becoming disillusioned with the incrementalism of civil rights and nonviolence, and just they were not seeing really tangible results. Especially younger folks in the North and in cities. They saw civil rights as sort of a Southern thing, not really addressing the problems of their community and their cities with police brutality and bad housing and just lack of employment. And so they wanted something that felt a little more that addressed them and their needs, and sort of other folks came to the forefront. People like Stokely Carmichael, or who later became Kwame Ture, were at the forefront of changing the narrative of what are our needs right now. And that's where the Black Panther Party and other organizations came from, when they saw that these little successes, these victories, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, were important bills, but didn't really change the violence by police or by white supremacist vigilantes across the country against Black people in America. They didn't see, well, we have these bills, but it's not really doing anything in the here and now to save our lives. So that's when it became much more about self-defense, much more about self-determination. And that's where younger generations sort of said, younger Black Americans said, we have to defend ourselves because the government's not going to do it for us. Nonviolence isn't going to do it for us. And so, people like Saladin Shakur said, well, have you considered, Saladin wasn't advocating for violence in the same way that, a lot of younger folks were. He was just saying, just take pride in who you are. That's where a lot of people started looking also towards like African nations and their movements for independence, and sort of taking that as inspiration and saying, we could do that here, but we also have to, shed our slave names and shed our Western clothing that we, have been told to wear. So it really became, especially in the East Coast, that really became a place where, people were starting to sort of look to Africa, look to other revolutionary movements happening across the globe, and apply it to themselves. And that's really, that really happened right in that sort of middle of the decade there.
Thank you very much for that grounding of the history. Your book also looks at the lives of many Shakur family members and Black Panthers, including Lumumba, Zayed, and Assata Shakur, Sekou Odinga, Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother. I want you to, there's this really great passage that's in the book where you describe where Afeni meets the Shakurs for the first time. If you could read that for us, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. When Afeni was first becoming acquainted with Sekou Odinga and Lumumba Shakur, she didn't consider herself political or much of an activist. What she saw in these two close friends was something more visceral, more intimate, something that was directly significant to her. Quote, "When I met Sekou and Lumumba, it was the first time in my life that I ever met men who didn't abuse women," Afeni recalled. As simple as that. It had nothing to do with anything about political movements. It was just that never in my life had I met men who didn't abuse women and who loved women because they were women and because they were people, end quote. Afeni and Lumumba became close, and she was introduced to members of Lumumba's family, including the venerable patriarch Saladin Shakur. Afeni was staggered by the familial love, support, and protection these men offered. As a 21-year-old woman whose personal experiences with men consisted primarily of an abusive father, gangbangers, and drug dealers, when she met the Shakur men, Saladin, Lumumba, and Zaid, her, quote, entire view of men and family was shaken up. She found that the Shakur family was not only strong, but they were independent thinkers. The feeling was mutual. Lumumba was captivated by Afeni's quick wit and candor. He was impressed by her political consciousness combined with pure candidness, directness, and lots of fire, and with how she never hesitated to give me constructive criticism on some of my actions. After receiving Saladin's blessing, Lumumba and Afeni married in the fall of 1968. It didn't seem to matter much at the time that Lumumba had been married for 2 years. He and his first wife, Saida, married in 1966 and were the parents of twin toddlers. Lumumba believed that being a Muslim permitted him to have more than one wife, and even though he had misinterpreted Islamic rules, Afeni and Saida agreed to this arrangement. Lumumba also misappropriated the Islamic wedding ritual, believing that all a Muslim groom needed to do to certify a marriage was to proclaim, "This is my wife," 3 times in front of a witness. With his brother Zaid as witness, Lumumba stood beside Afeni and declared, "This is my wife, this is my wife, this is my wife." and she became Afeni Shakur.
I mean, I don't want to over romanticize this, but there's this real simplicity and beauty that you hear in that description. And I think you do a really great job of laying bare the experiences without a ton of embellishing. And so what you hear is the honesty in Afena's appreciation for the Black man, for exactly who he is and exactly what he's bringing, and loving and appreciating and venerating that. And then you hear in return Lumumba and Zaid's and Sekou's appreciation for the fire and the passion and everything that Afeni is bringing as well, and allowing for that to be and for that to exist and to be part of the movement and part of their lives. It's beautiful to kind of see how the two elements, the male and female, appreciate each other and appreciate what the individuality and uniqueness or unique contributions that each brings. And I think that is essentially what family is. It's recognizing that mothering is very different from fathering. It's similar in some ways, but it has its own unique contributions, and both are necessary. And so, as we think about fathering, how did the Shakur men view fatherhood and being a Black man? Like, how common was it for men to act as father figures to those who weren't blood relatives?
I mean, it was really important to not only family, but also to the movement itself, to have strong Black daughters and sons equally who are proud of who they are, willing to do the work, willing to educate themselves. But it was important. It was really imperative to have, these their kids, their children be proud to be Black. For so many years, it was considered to be shameful. People, the country wanted to shame people for. So now the Shakurs and Saladin are saying, this is how we can really instill pride in our youth. Not just my own sons, but my adopted sons. Saladin, like not literally adopted, but really figuratively adopted so many young Black men in New York City, in Jamaica, Queens, and Harlem and Bronx, because they needed that father figure. They also needed some guidance and some pride in who they were. And as the years went on and the family grew, people like Mutulu Shakur, who became a stepfather to Tupac, they really saw it as a collective role. It wasn't just I am, this person's parent and my word is law. You know what I'm saying? It's we are all family. Like that old it takes the village to raise a child. Yeah. It really was. I mean, it really was that case, especially in New York City, where there was so much, just delinquency and just people sort of calling you like, into crime or into street gangs or whatever.
Right.
There's this strong family, the Shakurs, that say, no, there's another way. Come into this family, and we are, we're strong. We'll take care of you. Look after you. And that's really what they're about. It's just, a family is family, but the family is also, we have, it's the survival of our people depend on how well the children are being brought up.
I appreciate the fact that you brought up Tupac's relationship with his stepfather, Mutulu Shakur. We know that Tupac had this really tumultuous relationship with his biological father, Billy Garland, but he had a really strong relationship with his stepfather, Mutulu Shakur. How, if you could contrast those two, or tell us a little bit about those relationships.
Yeah, Mutulu came into Tupac's life when he was still a young boy. Mutulu and Afeni were married, ceremoniously married, not technically married and with the with the permission of the state, but they were married in the mid 70s. And Mutulu, he had children from an earlier marriage, and Afeni had Tupac earlier. But Mutulu really helped formulate, Tupac when he really needed some sort of guidance, because Afeni was, a single mother at this point, and Mutulu came in and he just threw himself into the role of father for Tupac, and then they had a child. They had a daughter together. Mutulu and Afeni had a daughter, Sechua. And years later, jumping forward years later, Mutulu was incarcerated. He's in prison for a series of crimes that he was accused of. And Tupac's now beginning his career as a young man. but they stayed in touch, all this time. I mean, they weren't at this point in late '80s, early '90s. Tupac was starting to get some attention for his music, his art, his movies, and starting to sort of run around with a different crowd, who didn't have his best interests at heart. And Mutulu was there for him even then. Like sometimes Tupac would go visit Mutulu in prison, and Mutulu would sort of help him remember who he was and how he was raised, and that he was a child of the movement, and sort of help him get back on track. Say, we need to, you need a plan. You need to develop your message, because right now, Tupac was just kind of just wilding out, just sort of just had all this attention and its fame, and he just sort of acted out. But Hulu was there for him during that time and said, you need to, what are you saying? When you say a thug life, what exactly does that mean? What does thug life mean? And helped Tupac develop the sort of code of thug life, which actually became sort of like not really a political platform, but just a code of ethics for young Black men who were, whether in like inner cities and ghetto or just the projects, sort of just developing a message that what does thug life mean? So Mutulu really helped Tupac develop this sort of political message when Tupac sort of seemed like he was going off the rails a little bit. So yeah, he was always there for him.
So you brought up Thug Life. Thug Life is the name of the album. It's a group. It's a movement. It's also one of Tupac's many tattoos. And of course, like you suggested, Mutulu did not support the idea of Thug Life. It was widely rejected by Mutulu and by many others. And you suggested that Tupac attempted to retrofit the thug life expression by giving it meaning that kind of suggested an inspiration for care for future generations, a legacy of caring, so to speak. Tell us more about this tattoo, this thug code, and what he meant when he said America is thug life.
Yeah, it's Tupac loved thug life. He took that on for himself, and then he just ran with it, and
Right.
when he got it tattooed on his abdomen, yeah, he was called in by Mutulu to go talk to him. He said, what is this, you're talking about snatching old ladies' purses? What is a thug? You're not a thug, because Tupac wasn't born that, he wasn't raised that way. He wasn't raised to, in the streets. So they went back and forth, and then eventually decided to to use thug life as an acronym for the hate you give little infants F's everybody, meaning the way that we treat our children, the way that the attention that we place, either the neglect or the care and love that we give them, really decides the fate of not only their lives, but people around them. Society at large is really affected by how the children are treated. So this is a way, this was really Tupac's message anyway, was that he really was dedicated to reaching disaffected, wayward young Black men and women in the streets where they're at. And so he felt like thug life was a way of reaching young Black folks where they are at, not trying to preach at them, not trying to like talk down to them, but just saying, using the language of his peers and saying, just care for yourself, look after yourself, do what you got to do to survive, but recognize that it affects all of us around you. It affects our families, it affects the old folks, the young folks, everybody around us. So just take that into consideration. But he, really wanted to present himself as being just another brother on the block, just another, cool dude. Like, but that's not who he was at heart. That's not how he was raised. But he did want to identify with that. So getting Thug Life tattooed was sort of his way of identifying with the brothers and sisters on the block. But also he wanted to not forget that he also had a message, a social political message behind all of that, which is what he was just trying to get everybody to come to.
I like how this father figure, Mutulu Shakur, is able to help Tupac readjust his message. So he sees him going down a particular route, and there's a legacy that's being built for him. And he's able to help him readjust his message, kind of right the ship. Tupac's family sought to predetermine his legacy by referring to him as the Black Prince. How is this Black Prince's legacy the activism of the Shakurs and today's activism? Do you see a direct link? Do you see that legacy continuing in today's activism?
Today's activism is a lot of times we look to the past, we look to older organizations and older organizers and leaders, and People who really responded to their day and age and their needs. Today, I feel like our message isn't really unified in a way that's sort of like, this is what we are advocating for. This is what we're working towards. There's a lot of different things that we're working towards, but as far as the means to get there, it feels very scattered, disjointed. Sometimes we're not really communicating as we should be face to face. We use social media rather than just going to our neighbors and meeting people. Tupac, what he did was say, like he was the only one that really was speaking to just people who like to party and everything, but also wanted to reach out in a more sincere way. And I don't know if we see that today, of people being that vulnerable, being that exposed, people who are putting themselves out there, making mistakes in the public eye and owning up to those mistakes. I feel like today a lot of people don't want to admit their mistakes or admit their vulnerabilities. And I think we can look to, Tupac and Afeni and Matulu and Sekou Odinga and be like, these are inspirations and cautionary tales for us, but we shouldn't let that define what we need right now. What we need right now is very urgent, end to police harassment, police brutality. We still have extreme wealth inequality, and these are the things that need to be addressed head on. We can march, we can hold signs, we can put yard signs, in our front yard or in our window, but really it comes down to just having to go out into the community, meet folks, and then really realize and dedicate ourselves to what needs to be done right now, rather than some sort of, bigger picture revolutionary goal. Just what does the community need right now? And that's what the Shakurs are doing. It's just, what does our community need right now? Let's go out and do it.
I love that. What does the community need right now? Let's go out and do it. I think your book, An American Family, is like a mirror to current day activism. It's blisteringly honest if you would dare to look into it. So thank you very much for writing it. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and sharing this book with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being on the podcast.
I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you again to our guest, Santi, for this really powerful conversation. It left me thinking that activism is recognizing what the community needs and going out and doing it. The Shakur family brand of activism seemed to be about action, while today's activism seems to be a little bit more on the reactive side. As a man, as a father, you have the opportunity to be uncle, advisor, elder, supporting and subsidizing the parenting of our children, ensuring a strong legacy of community, just as Saladin Shakur would have done. Some individuals intentionally engage in building a legacy that is carried through their bloodline and name. Others stumble onto good or bad fortune and develop a legacy through the conditions that they endure. And still others follow the path passed down to them, thereby extending legacy. However, we come to legacy, by our choices, we knit stories of our lives and families, and in so doing, expand the human story. What is your contribution to the human story? When you look back at your life, the patch that you would have added to the fabric of humanity, that will be judged based on the impact that you made. It will be seen and interpreted through the eyes of those whose lives you have improved. Fatherhood, whether as biological father or some other form of fatherhood, is a critical opportunity for men to engage in legacy building. It is an opportunity to reach across space and time and touch the future, to make a meaningful impact on names and faces you may never know and never meet. Fatherhood is time travel. Fatherhood is dream casting. Fatherhood is community strengthening. Fatherhood is nation building. Black fatherhood is resistance. Go out there and intentionally love your children, care for your children and families, protect yourself and your families and children. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others. Peace. You've been listening to the Black Fatherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alvin Thomas. I'm a clinical psychologist, researcher, and the director of the Tri-Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's School of Human Ecology. Original music for our series was composed and performed by Micaiah De Silva. Our series producer is Joe Ruby. The podcast is supported by the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you can follow me on Twitter at Dr_AT758. That's Dr_AT758. And on the web at thomaslab.humanecology.wisc.edu. Make sure to subscribe to the Black Fatherhood Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.